6 months ago, I thought the worst pain I'd ever feel was losing a pregnancy. I was wrong. While my husband was serving overseas, I leaned on his younger brother for support, someone I trusted like family. But kindness turned into something darker. In the middle of my grief, he crossed a line I never thought possible, and I've been carrying that secret alone ever since. Now my husband is coming home, and the truth is clawing its way out of me. What do you do when betrayal comes not from a stranger, but from inside your own family? When I look back at this year, I see two versions of myself. The woman who still believed in happy surprises, and the one who learned that some surprises are crueler than nightmares. I've been married for just over a year, and for most of that time, I would have told anyone that my relationship was the best part of my life. My husband isn't just my partner, he's my best friend. We laugh at the same dumb memes, we finish each other's thoughts, and no matter the distance, especially with his military service, I've always felt connected to him. But life has a way of breaking even the strongest bonds when you least expect it. Earlier this year, he lost one of his closest friends to suicide. Watching him spiral in grief from miles away, through calls and shaky video chats, was torture. I kept telling myself that maybe if something good happened, something big, it could pull him out of that darkness. Then came the pregnancy. Unexpected, unplanned, terrifying. But after the shock faded, it started to feel like hope. I imagined telling him in person, wrapping his tired body in my arms, and giving him the one piece of news that could lift his spirit. That fantasy got me through the nights when the bed felt like a cold ocean. But the universe doesn't hand out miracles just because you need them. A few weeks in, I started bleeding. The doctor's face gave me the answer before his words did. I miscarried. Just like that, every vision of a future family gone. I didn't tell my husband. I couldn't. How could I put another weight on his already fractured heart? I told myself I'd wait until I was stronger. I told myself silence was mercy. Looking back, I see now it was the first mistake in a chain I couldn't stop. Because silence created a gap, and someone else stepped into it. My brother-in-law lived in the same city, and when I could barely get out of bed, he appeared with groceries. When I couldn't drive to appointments, he took the wheel. At first, I thought it was kindness, and maybe part of me wanted to believe it was. I didn't realize that each favor was laying bricks on a path I didn't want to walk. There's a saying that grief makes you vulnerable. I used to think it was just about feelings. I didn't know it meant predators could smell it too. Everything was about to change. For the first couple of weeks after the miscarriage, I lived like a ghost inside my own apartment. My phone buzzed with calls from my husband that I couldn't answer. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing, too ashamed to pick up, too broken to tell him the truth. I convinced myself that keeping quiet was protecting him. In reality, it was isolating me. That's when my brother-in-law stepped in. First, it didn't feel strange. He was younger, friendlier, always the type to crack a joke at family dinners. When he showed up with takeout one evening saying he'd heard I wasn't eating properly, I felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone who noticed. The food sat between us on the couch, steam rising in the dim light. He asked me how I was holding up, his voice softer than usual. I answered with half smiles, half truths. I'll be fine. Just tired. He didn't push. He nodded like he understood, and that made me feel safe. The next time he came over, it was groceries. You shouldn't have to carry this alone, he said, putting bags on my counter. Those words pierced me more than he knew. Carrying alone, that was exactly what I was doing. For the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. But then something small made my stomach drop. He lingered. Too long. After unloading the groceries, he didn't leave right away. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me move around my kitchen. His eyes weren't mocking, not yet, but there was a weight in them I hadn't noticed before. I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining things, seeing shadows because I was stuck in darkness. After all, he was helping. He was the only one helping. That thought became my excuse. A week later, he offered to drive me to a doctor's appointment. I hesitated. My husband's brother behind the wheel, me in the passenger seat, both of us silent as the radio filled the gaps. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't right either. His hand brushed mine when I reached for the cup holder. He didn't pull away immediately. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. When he dropped me off, he smiled and said, "You can count on me." The words should have felt comforting. Instead, they echoed in my head all night, twisting into something else. I told myself he was just being nice. That's all it was. That had to be all it was. But deep down, a question started forming. What if it wasn't? And that was the moment I realized silence wasn't just protecting my husband anymore. It was leaving me exposed to something I didn't yet understand. I thought it was kindness, but something in his voice made me uneasy, and I couldn't shake it. The days blurred together, but his presence kept breaking through the haze. My brother-in-law always seemed to know when to show up, almost like he was keeping track of me in ways I hadn't invited him to. One evening, I came home from work and found a bag of groceries waiting outside my door. No note, no knock, just there like a silent reminder that someone else had been in my space. My first thought was gratitude, quickly followed by unease. Why hadn't he at least texted? Why did it feel more like surveillance than kindness? The next time he visited, he commented on how pale I looked. His eyes scanned me too long, too deliberately. I joked weakly that it was just the lack of sun. He chuckled but then added, "You need someone to take care of you." The words landed heavier than I wanted to admit. At night, lying awake, I replayed those moments. My rational side told me I was overthinking. He was family, for God's sake. He had good intentions. But my gut whispered another story. Every time his eyes lingered, every time his words carried that strange undertone, the whisper grew louder. A few days later, he insisted on bringing dinner again. I didn't want company, but saying no felt harder than it should have. He arrived with takeout, smiling like always, but there was a shift in the air I couldn't name. Halfway through eating, he leaned back and said casually, "It must feel lonely with him gone all the time." His voice was soft, but there was something under it, something testing me. I forced a laugh, nodded, and said, "At least I have you helping me out." It was meant as gratitude, nothing more. But the way his expression changed told me he heard something else. His smile stretched just a little too wide, like he'd been waiting for me to say it. I quickly excused myself, retreating to the kitchen to rinse plates I hadn't even finished. I could hear his footsteps behind me, closer than they needed to be. The air felt thick. I gripped a dish too hard, nearly dropping it just to keep from shaking. Later that night, when I checked my phone, there was a new message from him. "You know you don't have to be alone. I'm here for you." I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. Maybe it was harmless. Maybe I was twisting it. But the truth was, my body reacted before my mind could reason it away. My skin prickled, my throat tightened, and I couldn't shake the feeling that a line was being drawn in invisible ink. A line I didn't want him to cross. But the problem with invisible lines is that some people pretend not to see them. That night, as I locked my door, one thought wouldn't leave me. What if he wasn't just helping? What if he was waiting? It happened on a night I almost didn't answer the door. I was curled on the couch, staring at an empty TV screen when the knock came. My first instinct was to ignore it. But then I heard his voice. "I brought your favorite." My stomach twisted. He'd done this before, showing up uninvited, but tonight I was too drained to fight it. Against every instinct screaming at me, I unlocked the door. He came in like he belonged there, holding takeout in one hand and a grin on his face. "You need to eat," he said, placing the bags on the coffee table. His tone was light, but his eyes, they lingered on me in a way that made my chest tighten. We ate in silence, me forcing down bites just so it wouldn't feel rude. Then he said it. "You must feel so alone." I gave him a weak smile. "It's hard, but I'll manage." His eyes didn't move. "You don't have to manage. You don't have to be alone." Something in his voice froze me. It wasn't kindness anymore. It was suggestion. Intention. I stood quickly, retreating to the kitchen under the excuse of doing dishes. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the plate. Then I felt it. His presence behind me, so close I could feel his breath on my neck. My skin crawled. I turned to say something, but his hands were already on me. Too familiar. Too wrong. I snapped his name sharply, hoping it would jolt him back into reality. "Stop," I said, pushing at his chest. He didn't stop. His grip tightened, his voice low and coaxing. "It's okay. You're grieving. Let me help." The words made my stomach turn. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. Instead, tears streamed down my face. My whole body froze, caught between terror and disbelief. How could this be happening? This was family. This was supposed to be safety. I kept repeating stop through sobs, shoving at him with shaking arms until finally, I stumbled and collapsed onto the kitchen floor. Only then did he back away, staring down at me with an expression that made me feel even sicker. Not guilt, not panic, just something cold. I curled into myself, shivering and gasping for air as he finally stepped back. Without another word, he left. The sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot. For a long time I couldn't move. I sat on the floor, every nerve buzzing, replaying the moment his hands touched me. The groceries he'd carried in mocked me from the counter. Every detail of my apartment felt poisoned. And in that silence, one thought buried itself into my chest. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was betrayal in its purest form. And the worst part wasn't what he did, it was realizing he looked at me like it was never wrong. The days after felt like living inside a cracked mirror. Every corner of my apartment held echoes of that night. The kitchen where his hands touched me. The couch where we'd eaten. His words twisting kindness into poison. Even my own car, the one he had driven me to appointments in, felt contaminated. I avoided it all. I skipped meals because stepping into the kitchen made my stomach turn. I Ubered to work instead of driving. I threw away the leftover food he'd brought. But the smell lingered in my head like smoke that wouldn't clear. And the nightmares, God, the nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself unlocking the door. That one small decision replayed endlessly. The knock, the smile, the trap I didn't see coming. I'd jolt awake, heart hammering, whispering to myself that I was safe. But I didn't believe it. 10 days passed before I heard from him again. A text lit up my phone. Am I okay? No context. No apology. Just those words, as if he were checking on himself, not me. I didn't respond. 2 days later, another message. I'm here if you need anything. The audacity made me nauseous. He was pretending nothing happened. Pretending he hadn't broken me in my own home. My hands shook so hard I dropped the phone. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to spit the truth back into his face. But another part, stronger, heavier, was paralyzed by fear. What if I told my husband and it shattered him? What if I told my in-laws and they didn't believe me? I could already hear their voices. He'd never do that. You must have misunderstood. The silence became its own prison. I stopped answering friends' calls, ignored my mother-in-law's sweet check-ins, and let my sister-in-law's texts pile up unopened. How could I talk to them, knowing their brother, their son, had become my nightmare? One evening I forced myself outside just to breathe different air. Walking past a cafe I froze. He was there. Sitting at a table with friends, laughing like he hadn't ruined me. My chest tightened, my legs went weak. I ducked into a side street and leaned against a wall, fighting the urge to vomit. How could he live so freely while I could barely function? Back home, I stared at the locked door, double-checking it again and again until my fingers hurt. It didn't matter. Locks can't keep out memories. They can't erase betrayal. That night, as I lay awake, one thought looped endlessly. If he could act like nothing happened, then what stopped him from doing it again? And suddenly the fear shifted. It wasn't just about what he'd done. It was about what he still might do. I told myself that if I ignored him long enough, he would fade out of my life. That was the only way I could function, convincing myself it had been some kind of horrible lapse in judgment, one that he wouldn't dare repeat. So I tried to build walls. I silenced his number, avoided the places he liked to go, and kept my days mechanical. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat. For a brief stretch it almost worked. The silence on his end lasted long enough that I began to believe maybe it was over. I even started answering my mother-in-law's calls again. She asked if I'd be at the family dinner when my husband returned. My voice cracked when I said yes. For a moment I let myself picture it. Sitting at the table, my husband beside me, pretending life was normal. Pretending I hadn't been broken by someone who would likely sit across from me with the same easy smile. But hope is fragile when built on denial. One afternoon while I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed. Against better judgment I looked. It was him. Haven't seen you in a while. Miss our talks. My chest tightened. The words were casual, almost sweet, but to me they read like a threat. Miss our talks? As if what he'd done had been some mutual moment. As if I had asked for it. I didn't reply. I shoved the phone under a pillow like that could erase it. But the illusion of peace shattered. I couldn't go back to pretending he was gone. He was still circling, still waiting. That night I dreamed of the family dinner. In the dream, everyone laughed while I sat silent. He stared at me across the table, smirking, daring me to speak. When I woke up, drenched in sweat, I realized it wasn't just a dream. It was a warning of what reality would feel like if I stayed silent. I tried again to convince myself. Maybe if I keep quiet, the family stays whole. My husband doesn't have to suffer. No one has to know. I just need to bury it deep enough. But deep down I knew the truth. Secrets rot. They don't stay buried. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw less of myself and more of the secret I was carrying. I sat on the bathroom floor, clutching my phone, thumb hovering over my husband's contact. My heart pounded, my hand trembled. Just tell him. Just say it. But every time I tried, my throat closed. Because once I spoke the words out loud, nothing could ever be the same. And that's when I realized silence wasn't protecting him anymore. It was destroying me. The countdown to my husband's return ticked louder with every passing day. Each calendar square I crossed off felt like a heartbeat in my chest. Soon he would be here. Soon his eyes would search mine, and he'd see everything I'd been hiding. I tried to rehearse how I might tell him. I sat in front of the mirror, whispering fragments. I lost the baby. My lips trembled. Then, your brother. My voice broke completely. I couldn't finish. Every attempt left me shaking, convinced that if I said the words I'd destroy him. But the other reality was just as brutal. If I stayed silent, I'd destroy myself. The pressure only mounted when my mother-in-law called again. Her voice warm and expectant. We're all so excited to see you Saturday. It'll be just like old times. Old times. The phrase sliced me open. Old times were gone. They'd been buried the moment I locked that door behind him. That night I tried to sleep, but the nightmares were sharper. In one I was back in the kitchen, his hands pinning me down. Only this time my husband walked in. And instead of pulling his brother away, he looked at me with disgust. Why didn't you stop him? He asked. Why didn't you tell me? I woke up gasping, clutching the sheets, my heart slamming against my ribs. The fear wasn't just of what happened, it was of not being believed, of being blamed. The next day, as if summoned by my panic, another text came from him. Looking forward to Saturday. Don't worry, I'll keep your secret. My breath caught. Your secret. As if I owed him silence. As if this burden belonged to me, not him. My fingers shook as I held the phone, the room spinning. It wasn't just denial anymore. It was manipulation. He wanted me trapped. He wanted control. I dropped the phone, pressing both hands to my face, sobbing into my palms. The truth was no longer just eating me alive. It was being weaponized against me. That evening, my sister-in-law texted, asking if I'd ride with her to the dinner. I stared at the screen, paralyzed. How could I sit in a car with someone who adored him, not knowing the monster he really was? My husband's flight was only 3 days away. 3 days until everything collided. My secret. His betrayal. My husband's homecoming. I stood in the middle of my living room, shaking so hard I thought my bones might splinter, and I realized I couldn't hide anymore. The silence wasn't just suffocating. It was a noose tightening around my neck. And as the clock ticked toward Saturday, one truth echoed louder than fear. If I didn't speak now, I might never escape him. The airport felt louder than any place I'd ever been. Families reunited in tearful embraces, kids squealing, luggage wheels rattling against tile. My body moved on autopilot, but my mind was a hurricane. 3 months of silence, 3 months of carrying grief and betrayal in secret, all leading to this. And then I saw him. My husband. His uniform rumpled from the flight, his face thinner, eyes weary but brightening the second they locked on mine. For a moment, all I wanted was to collapse into his arms and let the world dissolve. I did. I clung to him so tightly people turned to look. He laughed softly into my hair. Missed you, he whispered. Those words shattered me. He had no idea how much he'd really missed, how much I'd hidden. On the drive home, I barely spoke. He filled the silence with stories from deployment, careful not to dwell on the darker parts. His hand reached across the console, finding mine, squeezing. I wanted to squeeze back with the same ease, but my palm was clammy, trembling. At home the dam finally cracked. He set his bag down, turned to me, and his smile faded. What's wrong? The words spilled before I could stop them. I was pregnant. My voice cracked like glass. His eyes widened, mouth opening, closing again as he tried to process. And? His voice shook. I lost it. Silence fell so heavy it felt like the walls leaned in. He stumbled back a step, covering his face. I could see his chest heaving, the grief hitting him like a freight train. I should have told you sooner, I whispered, tears blurring everything. He lowered his hands, eyes red, searching mine. Why didn't you? Because I was weak. Because I was scared. Because the truth didn't end there. There's more. My voice was barely a breath. He stiffened. More. I nodded, my body shaking. Your brother. The words stuck in my throat like poison. He hurt me. For a second I thought he hadn't heard me. His face was blank, frozen in disbelief. Then color rushed to his cheeks and his fists clenched. What do you mean? His voice was a growl. Tears streamed faster. He came over to help. And then he touched me. I told him to stop. I begged him. He didn't. The silence that followed was deafening. My husband's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, his jaw tight enough to crack. Finally, he stepped forward, pulling me into his arms with a fierceness that bordered on desperation. You should have never carried this alone, he whispered, his voice breaking. Never. For the first time in months, I let myself sob against him. The secret was out. The weight was no longer just mine. But in the back of my mind, one fear clawed still louder. Now that the truth was spoken, what would come next? Because if my husband confronted his brother, I didn't know if our family would survive the fallout. It's been weeks since that night at the airport, and I'm still learning how to breathe again. My husband didn't explode in rage like I feared. Instead, he turned that anger into protection for me, for us. He confronted his brother, not with fists, but with words that stripped away the mask he'd been hiding behind for years. The fallout was ugly. His family fractured. Some wanted to believe me, others couldn't bear the thought. But here's what I learned. Silence was never mercy. Silence was a prison. Speaking the truth broke me open, but it also freed me. For the first time since the miscarriage, I'm not carrying the weight alone. My husband and I are rebuilding. Slowly. Tenderly. There are nights when I still wake shaking, when shadows in the kitchen make my skin crawl. But now when I reach out, he's there. And instead of pretending I'm fine, I can finally say, I'm not. And he holds me until I believe I will be. I don't know what the future holds for his brother. Karma, family, maybe even law, those choices aren't mine to carry anymore. My victory is smaller but stronger. I survived. I spoke. And I was believed. So tell me, if someone you loved betrayed you in the moment you were most broken, would you bury the secret to keep the peace? Or speak the truth, knowing it could burn everything down?